39. As taught by the philosophy of Taoism, in all things is their opposite. The defeat of the Dest forces in open combat was the gateway to riches and control for the mercenaries commanded by Vost. Yet from the defeat came resurrection, and from victory came fragmentation. In the soft falling of night, Takuta sat dejected in his command post. He realized that he'd committed his mechs to a hopeless battle, and for that they were paying the penalty. That Jacobs's locust had not been destroyed was a stroke of luck. But luck was a fickle goddess, and the next time she might not smile upon his efforts. Hope and time for his people were slipping away like sands in an hourglass. For the second time since they'd landed on this planet, Takuta considered seppuku. The curtain of the command post was pulled aside and Parker Davood entered. "I've got some good news and some bad news, Commander." Davood pulled a chair back from the table and settled into it. "The good news is that we picked up some recruits from the Enclaves. The bad news is that only some of them are armed." Takuta looked at his aide. Surely this man had drifted from reality to fantasy. Recruits? There couldn't be recruits after the fiasco of the morning. But it turned out that Parker Davood was right on both counts. A steady stream of people was making its way from the Enclaves to the Dest location. They came for many reasons, but all wanted to offer their services. There was also a smattering of soldiers from each of the Enclaves, equipped with whatever weapons they'd been able to carry. By the time the huge mottled gibbous moon broke the rim of the eastern horizon, Takuta had almost a full platoon. The force was a mix of people from all three Enclaves, more than half of them women and children. Their weapons ranged from swords and muskets to light pistols and non-standard bolt-action rifles. Neither was there any standardization of ammunition, but it was a start. The people came, they said, because they believed the new humans on the outside offered a better future than did their life within the Enclaves. Some were drawn to Takuta's philosophy of a better world. Others were seeking dominance. A few were looking to even a score with those they had left behind. In all cases, Takuta welcomed them into his ranks and began the task of organization. In the Enclaves, there was a feeling of euphoria among the leadership. The demonstration of mech firepower had led each faction to decide that their future lay with Vost. They knew that by hiring the services of the mercenaries, they could achieve whatever goals they held in their deepest dreams. They knew that whoever employed those services would be the one who controlled the destiny of the Enclaves. To assure that future, they poured out their promises to Vost and the others. But the leaders of the Enclaves were not the only ones impressed by the demonstration. The entrepreneurs, represented by Akira Kochira and his associates, found themselves part of a crowded field, all clamoring for the services of the mercenaries. So fragmented were the groups and their offers that the aspirants found it easier to deal with the individual pilots in private than as a single entity. Vost, Seagroves, and Pesht were regularly besieged by enthusiastic buyers. It was a seller's market. Each of the pilots reacted to the offers in his own way. Vost was most easily approached by those with soft, sinuous bodies, luminescent eyes, and fulsome lips. Never in his life had such opportunities come his way. The women of the mercenary team, Wilson, Sabine, and Guardine, as well as Hund, were no longer the focus of his attention. Now that he had no time for the mundane or familiar, they were left to sit alone in their simple rooms or splendid quarters while he enjoyed the charms of Enclave society. As for Seagroves, he became so saturated with gold that his room was like a shrine to Midas. Gold in all its shapes and forms continued to pile up around him. Though the planet's artisans were accustomed to working in metals such as iron, copper, and silver, they had been hastily recruited to create objects of splendor in the baser metal. Then there was Pesht, who almost had to pinch himself to be sure all the marvelous offers were more than just a dream. No longer was he getting offers merely to become an important person. Now the offers were for him to become the important person in any coalition or single group. One offer piled on top of another until it was almost impossible to tell the difference. The last was always the best, but there was no reason to take it because the next one would be better. The leaders of the enclave soon became aware that they were being outbid by the individual groups. They also understood the two factors that were making the market crazy: the existence of the separate enclaves and the presence of the Dest force still lingering in the forest beyond. They decided to solve both their problems in one fell swoop. For the first time in almost 400 years, the three declared a truce among themselves, achieving, ironically, Takuta's single most important objective. He had inadvertently welded the enclaves together in a common purpose. Unfortunately, the purpose for which they came together in truce was his destruction. The leaders of the enclaves decided that by eliminating the forest force, they could reduce the need to hire the mercenaries. With Takuta gone, the enclaves might be able to get rid of the mercenaries in the same way they'd eliminated weapons of mass destruction so many centuries before. Takuta was first on their agenda. The organization was patchwork at best, but by dawn they had hammered out an agreement that would set the forces of all three enclaves against the human intruders and their Tatate friends now hidden in the forest. The enclaves would redeem their honor and resolve a problem at the same time. The plan called for their combined forces to make a concerted attack against the forest group. Each enclave leader would contribute his entire mobile group, supported by infantry and weapons, to the attack. Secretly, however, each one was also planning to hold back a portion, just in case things did not go as planned. With much handshaking, backslapping, and feigned goodwill, the leaders departed for their respective cities to make more plans. At dawn, the forces rumbled out from the gates of the enclaves. The mercenary pilots were too exhausted to take any notice, and only the technicians, still on lonely guard at the mech bastion, saw them go. None made any attempt to notify their commander. The three columns, a confused assortment of underpowered vehicles and clinging infantry, joined up in the open fields between Amatukaze and Usagumo. There was a momentary delay and fear of treachery when the Osio were late, but then everyone realized they had further to travel and had suffered a delay in getting started because of a communication breakdown. Unwilling to lose face at such a critical time, the commander of the Osio column pushed his people hard to make up for the error. Because of the delay, the Osio commander demanded the right to redeem his honor by leading the attack with his forces. The commanders of the Usagumo and Amatukaze finally agreed. The attack went in, a little late, a little ragged, but in. Takuta's people had seen the amalgamation of the forces coming. At first they thought it must be some climactic battle among the enclaves. But when they saw the troops coming together peacefully, they began to worry. The recruits who had joined during the night had no idea what was happening because they'd fled the enclaves before the decision to combine forces had been made. They were just as surprised as Takuta and his men by the assemblage. Any doubts about what was happening evaporated when the Osio Rentai turned to face the forest and then came on. The combat group was led by the lighter vehicles. These were small, wheeled affairs with exposed engines and troops on their rear decks, frantically working the pumps that forced fuel into the engine. Clouds of thick, dark exhaust rose from the tall stacks, belching forth more and more violently until tongues of fire could be seen from the crowns. The roar of the motors was deafening. As the scout cars came forward, their great wheels churned up the soft dirt. In the front of each one rode the commander in a perch high above the prow. A tall, wooden latticework tower was his post. He used a long prod to direct the driver, hammering on the unfortunate's shoulder whenever he wished to make a turn. Behind them came the heavier forces, enclosed vehicles that were covered with riding troops. These were armored forces and their infantry support. Great clods of dirt spewed from under their thrashing, spiked wheels. The infantry hung on, inspired by the terror of being thrown under one of the behemoths. It was all very grand. Trotting behind the vehicles came the regular infantry formations, carrying their assortment of muskets. Archaic though the weapons might be, they were equally deadly. Takuta had the advantage of firepower, but he lacked numbers. No matter where he deployed his thin forces, there would always be enough attackers to work around his flanks. To defeat this alliance would call for more than just bullets. The short-range missile launcher fired first, its arcing vapor trails streaking toward one of the second-line attack vehicles. The missile passed through the laminated wooden armor plate of the prow and exploded against the engine block on the inside. The vehicle staggered momentarily, then burst apart in a cloud of fire, steam, pulleys, belts, gears, and people. The Osio Rentai did not hesitate. A long, high-pitched scream rose up from the ranks of the jogging troops as they broke into a full run. Off to the right, Takuta heard the staccato stutter of a Dest light machine pistol, followed almost at once by the steady thump of the weapon section's machine gun. Some of the volunteer recruits were getting into the action. He couldn't hear it, but he was sure that the Dest laser rifles were working their way through the horde of rushing enemy. Then he saw that someone must have targeted a scout vehicle with a laser. First, the exterior of the engine produced a bright red spot, and then the whole cylinder, piston, smokestack, and manifold rose from the chassis like a rocket. It flared off into the smoke-shrouded sky with an infernal howl before crashing some distance away behind the supporting troops. Comlink chatter, unidentified but urgent.
Too many, have to pull back. Recruits breaking on my left. Posto hit, I'm withdrawing. Give me fire to the left, I have to pull back. Too many of them. Damn, they're like ants, can't crush them fast enough. Watch out for that next vehicle. Looks like a slug gun in the front.
Takuta considered ordering the Locust up in support, but he didn't know where the Lamb was. If he committed the mech too early, the Lamb could be on the scene in a few minutes and destroy it. Until he discovered the mercenary's location, he could not commit the mech. Then a great crash drew Takuta's attention. It was one of the second-line vehicles erupting in a cloud of smoke and coolant steam, probably from another missile hit. They were going to have to be careful. Those missiles would soon become more valuable than life. Then the vehicle emerged from the smoke, and Takuta realized that it had fired at his troops. A sudden trembling in the ground under his feet startled him. Looking off to the right, he saw a boulder the size of a large trash can bounding away into the forest. The vehicle was firing ball ammunition. Archaic, but deadly. You'd be just as dead if that fell on you as if hit by a laser, he thought. The Tatate allies were fighting with spears and wicked, short kogatana that were sharp enough to slice through an unarmored man. In fighting them, the Osio forces seemed to redouble their ferocity as though they wanted to exterminate the aliens rather than defeat them.
Machine gun's gone, had to pull back. Low on ammo. My right. Someone support my right. I can't hold them. Pull back. I can't get there. Pull back. The titties are taking it in the shorts. They're getting slaughtered.
Takuta followed the course of the battle over the comlink. His lines were collapsing all across the front. From what he could hear, the Dest members were doing all right, but the recruits and the Tatate were bearing the brunt of the casualties. The short-range missile launcher was loading and firing as fast as Sine and Miranda could slap rounds into the launch tray. Its IR system had no trouble locking onto the overheated tanks, but sooner or later the SRM would run out of ammunition. At Takuta's signal, his troops began to give ground.